You know, there's this strange silence that follows after someone we love is gone. It's not just quiet, it's heavy. It fills the space between what we used to say and what we can no longer hear. And in that silence, we ask ourselves, how do we talk to someone who's gone forever? It sounds impossible, right? Talking to someone who isn't here, but maybe the conversation doesn't end when they leave. Maybe it just changes form. Tonight, I want to share how we can find healing through that invisible conversation, how we can keep speaking, keep listening, and keep loving, even when the person we love has crossed that unseen horizon. You know, when we lose someone we love, the world doesn't really stop, but somehow it feels like it should. Everything keeps moving. People go to work, cars pass by, lights change from red to green, but for us, time sort of folds in on itself. There's a stillness that follows, a quiet that feels like it's swallowing everything familiar, and in that quiet, that's where they still are. Most of us try to run from it. We distract ourselves with noise, with tasks, with anything that helps us avoid the ache. But grief, it's patient. It waits for us to stop running. It waits for the moment when the world goes silent enough for us to finally hear what's left behind. The echoes, the small memories that drift up like light through water. That's presence. That's the quiet space where they still exist. I remember someone once told me, I can't stand the silence of my house now. It's like it reminds me every second that she's gone. But what if that silence isn't empty? What if it's full of all the moments you shared, all the laughter, all the love that never got to fade? Maybe silence isn't what's left after they go. Maybe silence is them, trying to reach you in a language beyond words. Presence isn't about pretending they're still here physically. It's about recognizing that their energy, their love, didn't vanish. It shifted. It became something quieter, gentler, harder to touch, but not impossible to feel. Science even gives us a small piece of that truth. A neuroscientist named Mary Frances O'Connor studied grief and found that our brains never really accept the idea of gone forever. The same part that lights up when we expect to see someone again. It stays active long after they've passed. It's like our minds are built to keep searching for love, even across the impossible. And maybe that's what love is. A refusal to believe in endings. When you sit quietly, and I mean really sit, no phone, no music, no distractions, you start to notice things, the rhythm of your breathing, the way sunlight falls on the wall, maybe even that you're remembering their voice saying something ordinary like, don't forget your keys, or I'll see you later. That's presence. That's them. Living inside the space you've made by just being still. I had a friend once, he lost his brother. They were close, like two halves of the same story. After the funeral, he couldn't sleep for weeks. He told me every time he closed his eyes, it was like the absence was louder than any sound. Then one night, he just stopped fighting it. He lit a candle, sat down, no words, no prayers, just sat in that heavy silence. He said something strange happened, not mystical, not dramatic, just this deep calm, like he could almost feel his brother's presence sitting across from him. He said it wasn't about seeing him or hearing him, it was about feeling him, like his love hadn't gone anywhere. It just changed shape. That's the thing about presence. It doesn't demand that we understand it. It only asks that we open ourselves enough to notice it. When we slow down long enough, grief begins to speak. It doesn't use sentences. It uses sensations. A sudden warmth when you think of them. The pull in your chest when you pass a place you used to go together. The strange comfort that comes from realizing that pain and love are the same language, spoken from opposite sides of the heart. I think of it like this. When someone we love dies, it's like they've gone into another room, one we can't see or enter. But sometimes if the world goes quiet enough, we can almost hear what's happening beyond the door. A faint laughter, a whisper of who they were. That's the conversation we keep having. Even when words are gone, people often say time heals, but it's not time that heals, it's presence. Time just gives us the space to learn how to listen again. Healing happens in those small, unexpected moments when we realize they never really left us. Not completely. Presence also lives in our bodies. Have you ever noticed how your hands remember what they taught you? The way you cook something the way they did without thinking? The way you hum a tune they loved when you're doing dishes? These small automatic gestures, That's memory wearing the disguise of muscle. That's love finding a way to stay alive through you. There's a Japanese concept called mono no aware. It roughly means the gentle sadness of things. The idea that beauty and loss are intertwined, that everything precious carries a shadow of impermanence. Presence lives in that space. It's the awareness that something beautiful once existed, and in acknowledging that, we honor its continuation inside us. I once met an elderly woman who lost her husband after 50 years of marriage. She told me she still made 2 cups of coffee every morning, one for herself, one for him. She'd place it across the table, take a sip, and talk about her day. When I asked if that made her sad, she smiled and said, "No. It reminds me he's still part of my morning." That's not denial, that's devotion. That's how presence becomes a bridge instead of a wound. Grief doesn't ask us to forget, it asks us to remember differently, to see love, not as a chapter that ended, but as a thread that continues weaving through every moment of our lives. When you sit in the quiet, and I hope someday you do, don't be afraid of what you might feel, that ache in your chest. That's proof that love existed, that warmth that rises when you think of them. That's love surviving. You're not alone in that silence. You're in conversation, one that transcends words, one that doesn't need sound. Presence is what allows us to keep loving in the dark. It's how we find meaning after loss. It's the way love whispers, "I'm still here," even when we can't see its face anymore. So when the silence comes, and it will, don't rush to fill it, don't drown it out, just breathe, sit with it, let it unfold. You might find that the quiet isn't empty at all. You might find that it's full of everything you thought you'd lost. Because the truth is, love doesn't end when a heartbeat does. It lingers, in the air, in the spaces we shared, in the rhythm of who we've become since they left. And maybe that's what it means to begin with presence, to stop looking for them outside ourselves, and finally realize they've been here all along. You know, when someone you love is gone, it can feel like the world has gone gray. The places you used to go together don't feel the same. The songs you once shared hurt to hear, and even the sunlight through the window feels different. It's like the colors of life have been washed out. You walk through the days doing what you have to do, but underneath it all there's this quiet ache that keeps whispering, "What now?" And maybe that's the hardest part, figuring out what to do with all that love that doesn't have anywhere to go anymore. But I think it still has a place. It's just that the way you express it changes. Talking to someone who's gone doesn't always have to be about words or prayers or memories. Sometimes it's about action. It's about speaking to them through the things they loved. When we do what they loved, when we touch the world the way they did, it's like we step back into their rhythm. For a moment, we find pieces of them hidden in the smallest things, the smell of coffee, the hum of an old record, the sound of rain against the window. These things become a language, a way of saying, "I remember you, I still see you." I once knew a woman named Laura who lost her mother when she was in her 20s. Her mom used to garden every weekend, not the tidy, perfect kind of gardening, but wild and alive, with flowers growing every which way. After her mother died, Laura couldn't bear to touch the garden. The flowers wilted, the weeds took over. She said it felt like a graveyard for everything beautiful she'd lost. One spring, after a long winter, she walked outside and saw a single daisy blooming between the cracks of the old patio. Just one. She said it felt like her mother had left her a message, something simple, but full of light. That day, she picked up her mother's gloves and started to garden again. Not to fix it, not to make it perfect, but just to feel that connection again. She said she started talking to her mom while she worked. Sometimes she'd laugh about something her mom used to say, sometimes she'd cry. But she told me it felt like those flowers carried her mother's voice, like every bloom was an answer to a question she hadn't even asked. That's what it means to speak through the things they loved. It's not about recreating the past. It's about continuing the dialogue in a new way. It's a way to honor them by keeping the parts of them that love the world alive. If they loved cooking, cook their favorite meal. Let the kitchen smell like they're still there, humming while the sauce simmers. If they loved music, play that one song they couldn't stop singing along to, even if it hurts, because somewhere in that melody they're still laughing. If they loved helping people, then go out and do something kind. For no reason other than that it would have made them smile. That's how you keep their voice in the world. There's this idea that when someone dies, we lose them completely, but that's not entirely true. There are traces, echoes that stay behind. Science even tells us that memories are physical. Every time we remember them, every time we engage with something they loved, we strengthen those neural pathways, literally keeping their presence alive in our minds. So when you make that dish they loved or take that walk they used to take, it's not symbolic, it's biological. Your brain brings them closer, shaping love into memory and memory into presence. A friend of mine lost his older brother, a musician who loved old vinyl records. For months, my friend couldn't touch his brother's collection. The thought of hearing those songs again felt unbearable. But one day he decided to play one, just one. It was a blues song, slow and raw, the kind of track that fills a room with soul. He said as it played, something shifted. He didn't cry this time. Instead, he smiled. He started remembering how his brother used to tap his foot, how he'd close his eyes at the best part of the song and say, "Man, this is it." That night, my friend said he felt like they'd had a conversation, not with words, but with music. It's strange, isn't it, how grief can turn into grace when we let love lead the way. Speaking through what they loved also helps us rediscover who we are. Because when someone leaves, they take a piece of us with them, but they also leave a piece of themselves behind in us. When you continue what they started, you're not just keeping their memory alive, you're expanding it. You're allowing their influence to keep shaping the world. Think of a father who loved fixing old cars, and his daughter grows up to restore one in his memory. Every turn of the wrench, every spark from the metal, every long night spent in the garage, that's a language of love. She's not just talking to him, she's carrying on the rhythm of who he was. Or the young man who lost his grandmother, the one who taught him to bake bread from scratch. For a long time, he couldn't bear the smell of yeast or flour. It reminded him of her kitchen, the laughter, the warmth, the way she'd wipe her hands on her apron before hugging him. But one day he decided to try again. He baked a loaf, and as he pulled it from the oven, he said it was like she was there again, not in body but in spirit. He could almost hear her say, "That's it, you got it right this time." That's the beauty of love. It doesn't have to vanish when life does. It finds new forms, new languages, new ways to keep speaking, and sometimes those ways become something bigger than us. People start foundations, plant trees, write songs, make films, not to erase their grief, but to give it purpose. Every act of creation born from love becomes a bridge between here and wherever they are. When we engage with what they loved, it's like we're tuning into a frequency they once lived on. And if we're quiet enough, open enough, we can still hear them there, in the rustle of leaves, the strum of a guitar, the laughter of friends, the warmth of a candle flame. So maybe the question isn't how do we move on from them? Maybe it's how do we move forward with them? You don't have to look for them in the stars or the heavens or some faraway place. They're here, in the things that move them, in the moments that made them feel alive. Every time you touch those things again, you're not reopening a wound, you're reopening a conversation. And maybe that's the quiet truth about love and loss. They were never meant to be opposites. Love teaches us how to hold on, and loss teaches us how to keep holding on differently. When we speak through the things they loved, we let love have the last word, and maybe that's what keeps them alive, not in memory alone, but in motion, in the sound of music, in the smell of the earth, in the laughter that returns when we least expect it, because love doesn't leave. It just finds new ways to be heard. You know, there's something about grief that makes words feel heavy. When someone you love is gone, language starts to lose its shape. You try to explain what you feel, but everything sounds smaller than the truth. People say things like "I'm fine" or "I'm okay," but what they really mean is "I'm lost." And sometimes, no one around you can really hear the depth of that loss. Not because they don't care, but because there are no words that can carry the weight of it. That's when writing becomes more than just ink on paper. It becomes a bridge, a way to reach across the silence. Writing them a letter isn't about pretending they can read it. It's about giving your heart a voice again. When you sit down and start writing, it's like unlocking a door you didn't know was closed. The words don't have to make sense. They don't even have to be pretty. You just start where you are. Maybe you begin with "I miss you." Maybe you start with anger. "Why did you leave?" Or maybe it's something softer. "I saw the sunset today and thought of you." Whatever it is, it's real. It's you talking to them the only way you still can. There's a strange magic in that when you write, you're not speaking to the air. You're speaking to memory, to love, to that part of you that still holds their voice somewhere deep inside. And little by little, you realize that writing isn't just about reaching out to them. It's also about reaching back into yourself. It's a way to find the parts of you that got buried under the pain. I once met a man who had lost his wife after 30 years of marriage. He told me that for months he couldn't speak about her without breaking down. One night he sat at the kitchen table, opened a notebook and just wrote, "Dear Anna, today I made your favorite soup, but it didn't taste the same." He said he wrote that one line and then stopped. The next day he wrote another, "I fixed the leaky faucet like you used to remind me to." Over time, those letters became a kind of dialogue. He told her about the days, the seasons changing, the little things he would have told her if she were still sitting across from him. He said that after a while he didn't cry as much when he wrote. He smiled, because, in writing to her, he felt like he was still living with her, not just without her. That's the power of writing. It transforms grief into something you can hold, something you can understand. You can't control loss, but you can give it a shape, a sound, a rhythm. It doesn't fix the pain, nothing really does, but it gives the pain a home so it doesn't have to live in your chest anymore. There's actually research about this. Psychologists call it expressive writing. It's been shown that people who write about their grief or trauma experience better emotional healing. Their stress levels drop, their sleep improves. It's not magic, it's the simple truth that what we can name, we can begin to heal. When you put feelings into words, you take something that's been floating in the dark and bring it into the light. I think we all carry stories that we never get to finish. Maybe you never got to say I'm sorry. Maybe you never said thank you. Or maybe you never said I love you enough. A letter gives you a second chance to say those things. It's not about closure because love doesn't really close. It's about continuation. It's saying I still have things to share with you. I still have love to give. I remember someone telling me about a box they kept under their bed, a small wooden box filled with letters to their father. He had passed away when she was 17. Every year on his birthday, she wrote him a new letter. At first, they were full of pain and confusion, but as the years passed, the letters changed. They became about gratitude, about the lessons she'd learned, about how much of him she still saw in herself. She said writing those letters helped her see that grief wasn't a wall she had to climb. It was a path she had to walk. And those letters were the footprints she left along the way. When you write, you might notice something surprising. Sometimes the words start writing you. You begin by trying to talk to them, but the letters end up revealing parts of yourself you didn't know were there. Old regrets, hidden hopes, the small acts of love you never recognized. The page becomes a mirror, gentle, honest, forgiving. Some people burn the letters afterward, as a kind of ritual, letting the smoke carry the words wherever they need to go. Some keep them in a box, tucked away for days when the ache returns. Some never read them again, and that's okay too. The healing doesn't come from what happens to the paper, it comes from the act of writing it, the motion of the hand, the steady rhythm of your heart remembering I loved, and that love mattered. There's a story I've always carried with me, about a boy who lost his mother. Every year on her birthday, he wrote a letter, folded it into a paper boat, and set it afloat in the river near their home. He said he didn't know if the river took the letter anywhere, but it helped to imagine it did, that somehow the current would find its way to wherever she was. Years later, when he grew up, he brought his daughter to the same river. She watched him set a paper boat on the water and asked, "Who are you writing to?" He smiled and said, "Someone who taught me how to love." That's what letters do. They connect generations. They keep love moving forward, even when it has no destination. When you write to someone who's gone, you're not trying to change the past. You're simply saying, I remember. You're acknowledging that their story still lives inside yours. It's a way of saying, you're not forgotten. You're still part of me. And over time, those letters stop feeling like a goodbye and start feeling like a conversation that never really ended. Grief can make you feel powerless, but the act of writing, that small, deliberate choice to pick up a pen and face your heart, that's strength. That's courage. because it means you're willing to meet your pain instead of running from it. You're willing to give it words, even when it trembles. And maybe someday you'll look back at those letters and realize something beautiful, that you were never just writing to the one you lost. You were also writing to yourself, to the part of you that needed to hear it's okay to miss them. It's okay to love them still. It's okay to keep going. So take your time, find a quiet place, let the pen move, let the words find you. You don't have to know what to say. You just have to start. The heart will do the rest, because love doesn't need perfect sentences. It just needs a place to speak. And sometimes that's all a letter really is. Love, still trying to find its way home. You know, when we lose someone, there's this strange silence that seems to settle over everything. People stop saying their name. Conversations change direction when the subject comes up. Friends who once laughed with you about them now glance away, unsure of what to say. It's as if the world quietly decides that speaking their name might hurt too much, like silence is somehow a kindness. But silence, no matter how well-meaning, can start to feel like a second death. It's like the person you love begins to fade, not because they're gone, but because no one dares to remember them out loud. Letting others speak their name, that's one of the most powerful acts of healing you can invite into your life. It's an act of courage, of remembrance, of love refusing to be erased. It's saying, yes, they're gone, but they're still part of my story. And it's giving others permission to remember too. There's a quiet bravery in breaking that silence. At first, it's not easy. When you bring up their name, it might make people uncomfortable. Some will look away, some might change the subject, some might even tell you it's time to move on. But grief doesn't follow anyone's schedule. Love doesn't have an expiration date. You're not keeping the past alive by speaking their name. You're keeping love alive. I remember meeting a woman who lost her teenage son in an accident. She said that after the funeral, people stopped mentioning him. Even family, they thought they were protecting her. Every conversation carefully avoided his name, as if pretending he hadn't existed could somehow make the pain smaller. But what it really did was make her feel alone, like everyone else had moved on while she was still standing in the same moment, unable to breathe. One day she sat her family down and said, "Please don't be afraid to say his name. Hearing it doesn't break me, not hearing it does." After that, things changed. Her friends started sharing stories again, funny ones, embarrassing ones, even the sad ones. She said the house began to feel warm again, because the sound of his name brought him back into the room, not as a ghost, but as the son, the friend, the bright, beautiful soul he had been. That's what happens when we allow their names to live on our tongues. We invite light into the spaces where grief has built walls. We remind ourselves that love isn't diminished by death, it's expanded by memory. When you speak their name, something happens, not out there but inside you. It's like your heart opens a little wider. You might cry or you might laugh or both at the same time. That's okay, that's the sound of healing. Grief isn't linear, it's circular. It comes back around in waves, and sometimes speaking their name is how you stay afloat. There's real science behind this too. A study from Harvard found that sharing stories about those we've lost helps regulate emotional pain. It engages the same parts of the brain that process connection and empathy. In other words, when we speak their name, we aren't reopening the wound. We're helping it close the right way. Silence isolates, but storytelling unites. I think about families who keep a tradition alive after someone passes. A yearly dinner, a favorite holiday recipe, a toast before a meal. Every time someone says, "Remember when she used to," or "he would have loved this," it's like striking a match in the dark. That small flame might flicker, but it reminds everyone that the warmth is still there. There's something deeply human about wanting to keep names alive. It's why we name stars after loved ones, why we build memorials, why we carve words into stone. But even more powerful than the name written down is the name spoken. 'Cause when you speak it, you fill it with life again. Your breath, your voice, your memory. You're telling the world they mattered. They still matter. I once knew a man who lost his younger brother in the military. Every year on his brother's birthday, he'd call up his old friends and say, "Tell me a story about him, something I don't know." He said that every time he did, he discovered a new piece of his brother's life, moments he'd never witnessed, laughter he'd never heard. He told me, "It's like my brother keeps growing even now." That's the gift of sharing their name. They continue to exist through others' memories, and that's something worth thinking about. When we stop talking about them, we're not just silencing our grief, we're silencing their story. But when we speak, when we listen, we're weaving their essence into the fabric of our lives. Sometimes it's as simple as mentioning them in passing. "She used to love this song," or he would have made a joke about that. Those little moments of acknowledgement carry a weight far greater than silence ever could. They remind others that it's okay to remember, that it's okay to keep loving. I remember hearing about a teacher who lost her husband young. She said that in her classroom she would sometimes share small things about him, how he loved reading poetry or how he used to say the world looked different after rain. One of her students asked her once, "Doesn't it make you sad to talk about him?" And she said, "Sometimes, but it also makes me feel like he's still teaching me something." That's the thing. The more you speak their name, the more you find that they haven't stopped giving. Their lessons, their humor, their kindness, all of it lives on in the stories we tell. Grief changes the way we carry them, but it doesn't take them away. It can take time to get there, though. At first, speaking their name might feel like tearing something open. It might feel raw. But over time, those same words begin to heal instead of hurt. You might notice it one day, almost without realizing someone mentions them, and instead of crying, you smile. You feel warmth where the ache used to be. That's love doing what it does best, turning pain into presence. And when others see you speak their name without fear, you give them permission to do the same. You create a space where remembering is safe. That's how healing grows, not in isolation, but in community. The truth is, when we speak their name, we're not only keeping them alive, we're keeping ourselves alive too, because love doesn't just connect us to the ones we've lost. It connects us to everyone around us. It reminds us of what it means to be human, fragile, finite, but capable of infinite love. So, say their name. Say it softly, or say it loud. Tell their stories, laugh about their quirks, cry about the things you miss. Let their memory breathe through you. Because every time you speak their name, you bring a little more life into the world, theirs and your own, and that's something worth holding on to. When someone we love is gone, the world feels quieter in a way that hurts. You start noticing the space they used to fill, the empty chair at the table, the silence where their laughter used to live, the absence that echoes in small, unexpected moments. And at first, that silence feels unbearable. It's like standing in the aftermath of something you can't fix, trying to remember how to move forward when every step feels wrong. But grief, as heavy as it is, holds something inside it, a strange kind of energy. It's love that doesn't know where to go anymore. It lingers searching for direction. And maybe that's what we're meant to do after loss, to take that love and give it somewhere new to live. Because when love has nowhere to go, it aches. But when you give it purpose, it heals. Turning grief into giving isn't about denying the pain or pretending everything's okay. It's about realizing that love doesn't end when a heartbeat does. It changes form. It finds new ways to move through the world. Every act of kindness, every hand you hold, every small moment of compassion. Those become echoes of the person you lost. You carry their love forward through the things you do. I once knew a man who lost his wife to cancer. For a long time, he shut everyone out. The world didn't make sense anymore. Then one morning, he saw a neighbor struggling to fix a broken fence. Without thinking, he went over to help. When they finished, the neighbor said, "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." And he just nodded and said, "Yeah, I did." He told me later that something shifted that day. Helping someone gave his grief a heartbeat again. It didn't erase his pain, but it gave it direction. That's what happens when you start to give. Your grief starts to breathe again. It becomes movement instead of stillness. It becomes connection instead of isolation. Sometimes that giving turns into something bigger, like volunteering, creating, mentoring, starting something that matters. But sometimes it's small, smiling at a stranger, calling an old friend, listening when someone else is hurting. The size doesn't matter. What matters is that you're letting love live through you again. There's a story about a woman who lost her son and began leaving anonymous notes around her town, messages that simply said, "You are loved." She never signed them. She didn't tell anyone why she did it, but people found them. in coffee shops, in libraries, on park benches, and some of them said those notes showed up on the hardest days of their lives. Her grief became something that touched others, quietly, beautifully. It was her way of saying, my love for him is still here, and I'm giving it back to the world. When you give, you don't lose what you had, you extend it, you take what feels like an ending and turn it into a continuation. It's like a light that passes from one person to another, and even though the pain doesn't vanish, it begins to transform. It becomes softer, more bearable, more meaningful. I think that's how love survives loss. It finds ways to keep creating. Maybe the person you lost inspired you to see beauty in simple things, or to care deeply, or to love without holding back. So you keep doing those things, not just for them, but through them. You live as the proof that their love didn't disappear. Grief can feel like the end of everything, but giving turns it into a beginning. You may never stop missing them, but you can let the missing become motion. Motion toward kindness, motion toward others, motion toward healing. And maybe, just maybe, every act of giving becomes a quiet conversation with them. A way of saying, I still love you. I'm still carrying you forward, because grief doesn't have to end in sorrow. It can end in love that keeps on giving. So how do you talk to someone who's gone forever? You listen. You act. You write. You remember. You give. You realize that death ends a life, but it doesn't end the conversation. And maybe the healing isn't about saying goodbye. Maybe it's about learning to say thank you over and over again until the words feel like peace.